Get that man away from my horse. Somebody get him away from my fence right now.
1,800 people heard it. The black man in worn field boots heard it too. He did not move.
Sir, this is a ticketed event.
I heard the offer. Volunteer. No ticket, asking to ride a horse that put 3 men in the hospital this year alone.
I'll sign the waiver.
Any experience with horses? I would hate to be responsible for what he does to you.
Some laughed. Most did not. His hand was not steady when he wrote the check, because Cutter Odom walked away with $2.3 million. Subscribe right now. Tell me where you're listening from, because we're just getting started. Let me take you back to 11 miles of road, to the decision that was already made long before Pruitt ever touched that microphone. Get that man away from my horse. Hear me? Somebody get him away from my fence right now. Dellard Pruitt said it into a live microphone in front of 1,800 people on the east lawn of Crestfall Farm outside Lexington, Kentucky, on an October afternoon that had just stopped being ordinary. His voice carried the easy volume of a man who had never once needed to raise it, because the people around him had always moved first. The crowd heard it. The 3 network cameras heard it. And the black man standing at the white rail fence in worn field boots and a coat that had seen too many Kentucky winters. He heard it too. He did not move. Pruitt leaned into the microphone again, his smile returning, the performed kind, the kind designed to turn discomfort into entertainment for the people watching from a safe distance. Sir, this is a ticketed event. The crowd shifted. Some laughed. Most did not. The laughter that existed was the uncomfortable kind, people buying themselves a moment before they had to decide what they actually thought about what they were watching. The man at the fence turned. He looked up at the podium where Pruitt stood 2 feet above everyone else by deliberate design. I heard the offer, he said. That was no escalation, no plea. 4 words that landed in the arena like something heavy dropped from a great height and did not bounce. Pruitt covered the silence with a slow lean into the microphone. Well now, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a volunteer. The word did exactly what it was meant to do. It told 1,500 people how to rank what they were seeing. A black man in a charity shop coat, no ticket, no invitation, standing at the gate of a $2.3 million event like he belonged there. The word volunteer said, he does not. What's your name, friend? Odom. Pruitt let the name sit there a moment, turning it over the way a man examined something he found in a parking lot. Mr. Odom. The pause before it said everything the words wouldn't. You got any experience with horses? Because this animal has put 3 men in the hospital this year alone, and I'd hate to be responsible for. I'll sign the waiver. Something crossed Pruitt's face. Not anger. Harder to name than anger. A tightening around the jaw, a brief flicker behind the eyes. The expression of a man who has just realized the script he has been running has only 1 page left and does not like what is written on it. He gestured to Fowler, his event coordinator, who had been standing at the base of the podium with a clipboard since 9 that morning. Fowler brought the waiver to the gate. Pruitt watched the man read it, every line, and sign it. He watched Fowler glance at the signature twice before walking it back. Pruitt looked down at the name on the page. His jaw moved, barely, like a man working something loose that had been caught between his teeth for a long time. He covered it before anyone could read it and turned back to the microphone. All right, let the man ride. If that's the kind of story you want more of, hit subscribe right now, because we're just getting started. Crestfall Farm sat on 400 acres of bluegrass country outside Lexington, Kentucky, and it looked exactly the way 4th-generation money is supposed to look. Unhurried, permanent, the kind of land that does not need to announce itself because it has never once been in danger of being taken. The east lawn had been converted for the event with the precision of a man who measures success by what other people can see. bleachers trucked in from Cincinnati at $40,000. A podium built 2 feet taller than the rail. A network broadcast truck from Louisville backed along the tree line, its cables running through the October grass. 2 flags on either side of the main gate bore the Crestfall name in letters large enough to read from the road, the kind of detail that is not for guests, but for everyone who drives past and will never be one. Dellard Pruitt was 61 years old. His grandfather had bred Kentucky champions. His father had maintained them. Pruitt had inherited both the land and the reputation, and had spent 20 years in the quiet, constant work of proving he had earned neither. He referred to his stable hands by their job titles. He referred to reporters by their first names. The gap between those 2 facts said everything a biography could not. He had convened this event, the Crestfall Challenge, now in its 3rd year, because a horse he had paid an extraordinary amount of money to produce had turned out to be extraordinary in a way he had not planned for. And Dellard Pruitt did not know how to be in a room with a problem he could not solve, so he had done what wealth does in that situation. He had turned the problem into a spectacle. The horse was called Ironclad, 16 hands of dark bay thoroughbred, chest like a ship's prow, bloodline that traced through his sire, a 2-time Breeders' Cup winner, and, through his dam, back to Secretariat himself. He had arrived into the world with every advantage money could engineer. He had spent the 3 years since refusing every attempt to make him useful. Not in the way difficult horses refuse, not with aggression at the gate or violence in the cross ties. Ironclad was patient. He let a rider settle, let the weight find its position, let the expectation build, and then he had left a full-body explosion, no warning, no pattern anyone had ever decoded. 3 of the 6 men who had tried him across 3 years of events walked off under their own power. The other 3 did not. The most recent, 7 weeks before this afternoon, had been airlifted from this same ring to a trauma unit in Lexington. Pruitt had not canceled the event. He had raised the prize money to $2.3 million and sent new invitations. The size of a problem, in Pruitt's experience, was best answered by the size of a number. 1,800 people had come to watch. A state legislator in a blue tie sat in the 4th row of the front section, flanked by 2 insurance executives and a bloodstock agent who had flown in from Ocala. Journalists from 2 Louisville papers worked the rail. The cameras were live on both sides of the ring. High-status witnesses. The same function they always serve when powerful men stage public spectacles. They made the injustice heavier. They would make the triumph larger. At the far rail, separate from the crowd that had filled the bleachers in sections. Since the gates opened, a man stood alone and watched the horse. He had arrived before the concession tents were staked, before the network truck backed into position. He had found a gap in the outer fence near the paddock and come through without hurrying. The way a man moves when he has already decided something and is no longer nervous about it. He wore field boots that had dried wrong after too many seasons, a coat that had been good once. He carried nothing. He stood at the rail, and he did not watch the podium, did not watch the crowd filling the bleachers above him. He watched only Ironclad, who moved in the far paddock with the contained, careful energy of an animal that had learned to be ready for pain at any moment. Once early in the morning, before the first row of bleachers filled, the man raised his right hand and pressed it briefly against the inside of his coat, over his chest, the way a man checks something he is keeping close. Then his hand dropped and he went back to watching the horse. His name was Cutter Odom. He was 54 years old. He had walked 11 miles from a rooming house off Winchester Road that morning to be standing at this rail. Nobody at Crestfall Farm knew that yet. Nobody needed to. In the paddock, Ironclad turned his head toward the rail and held it there. His nostrils worked the air. His ears, which had been pinned flat since the stable hands tacked him 40 minutes earlier, rotated forward by a single degree. Cutter did not move toward the horse. He did not speak. He stood the way a fence post stands, without apology, without urgency, without the particular human need to fill silence with motion, and Ironclad, who had charged the paddock gate 3 days earlier, when a groom came within 30 feet, stood at the far end of the paddock and went still, before the first rider ever climbed into that saddle. Cutter Odom had already seen what was wrong with this horse. He just hadn't been asked yet. The first rider's name was Garth Neal. He came out of Elizabethtown, Kentucky, 9 national circuit titles to his name, and he walked the Mount Block the way men walk when they have never seriously considered losing. The crowd was loud for him. He settled into the saddle with the ease of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Weight balanced, heels down, hands soft on the reins. Ironclad stood perfectly still beneath him. Let the weight find its place. Let the expectation build. 9 seconds later, Garth Neal was on his back in the dirt. No warning, no telegraphed shift. One moment the man was seated, and the next the horse had simply left. A full-body detonation that sent Neal into the air at an angle that made the crowd inhale as one. He landed hard on his left shoulder and lay still for 2 seconds before the instinct to stand overrode everything else. He got up. He pulled his helmet off and looked at Ironclad the way a man looks at something that has just taught him a lesson he didn't sign up for. Then he walked off without looking at the podium, without looking at the cameras, without looking at anything except the gate he needed to reach. At the rail, Cutter watched the moment before the explosion. Not the fall, the moment before. The micro-shift of Ironclad's weight, a half-second before the horse moved, that nobody else in the ring had caught. He watched it the way a doctor watches a symptom present itself in a patient who has been misdiagnosed for years. His expression did not change. His eyes did not move from the horse. The second rider climbed the mount block before the crowd's energy had fully reconstituted itself. He was from Bowling Green. The narrator does not give his name, because by the time he hit the ground, the crowd had already stopped giving him one either. He lasted 4 seconds. The collective sound from the bleachers was quieter this time. Not grief yet. Something closer to dread watching itself happen in real time. The particular silence of people who have started to understand that what they are watching is not a competition. The man walked off under his own power and did not look back. Then Petra Duval walked to the mount block and the crowd changed. She was out of Versailles, Kentucky, the only female jockey to win at Churchill Downs 3 consecutive years, a record that the racing press had covered with the particular enthusiasm reserved for things that have and surprising in equal measure. The crowd received her differently than the 2 men before her. There was something protective in how they watched her mount, something they were already quietly bracing themselves to feel. She settled into the saddle with a control so precise it looked like stillness. Ironclad stood beneath her, waited, let the weight settle, let the hope in the bleachers form into something solid. 22 seconds. She lasted 22 seconds, longer than anyone had ever stayed on Ironclad, longer than the combined rides of the 2 men before her, and she did it with a form so composed, so technically exact, that when the horse finally sent her into the rail, the crowd made a sound that was neither a gasp nor a cheer. It was grief, pure and unambiguous. She hit the rail at the shoulder and went down, and for 1 terrible second nobody breathed. Then she stood, pulled her helmet off, looked at Ironclad from 15 feet with an expression nobody in the bleachers could name. Not anger, not defeat. Something more considered than either. Something that looked almost like recognition. Then she walked to the gate without once looking at Pruitt's podium. She did not look back. Before we go any further, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The moment after Petra walked off was when the air changed. Not loudly, not with any single dramatic signal. The investors in the front section leaned back in their seats for the first time since the opening bell. The state legislator in the blue tie took his phone out. The network director cut twice to the empty saddle stand near the paddock gate. Dead air. Bad television, the visual equivalent of an event running out of things to say. Pruitt felt the room sliding. He had felt rooms slide before, and he knew what a dying room felt like from the inside. And he reached for the only tool that had ever worked for him in that situation. He spread his arms wide and smiled into the microphone. $2.3 million, he said. Stilts. On the table. For anyone in this crowd today who can ride my horse for 8 seconds. The money is theirs. He laughed when he said it. The laugh was designed to signal, this is theater, this is generosity. This is the kind of offer that only works because everyone in the bleachers understands it will never be collected. He scanned the crowd for a drunk, a ranch hand with something to prove, a kid on a dare. He was looking for someone he could manage, someone whose attempt would give the afternoon a punchline and buy Pruitt enough cover to call the event a success. He did not find what he was looking for, because Cutter Odom had already stepped away from the rail. He did not raise his hand. He did not call out. He simply moved, the way a man moves when the decision was made long before this moment arrived. And the crowd, one row at a time, turned to watch him come. The crowd registered him in sections. Front rows first, then the middle, then the back. A slow ripple of turned heads and lowered voices that reached Pruitt's podium before Cutter reached the gate. He walked without hurry. No acknowledgement of the cameras that were already tracking him. No performance of confidence. No performance of anything. Just a man in worn field boots crossing packed earth toward a gate that nobody had invited him through, moving the way men move when the decision behind the movement is already complete. Pruitt's laugh shortened by half a beat. Sir. His voice came through the speakers with a new texture. Not quite sharp, not quite friendly. The careful tone of a man deciding in real time how to handle something he had not planned for. Sir, this is a ticketed event. Cutter stopped at the gate. He looked up at the podium. I heard the offer. That was all. No anger in it, no plea. The wind off the paddock moved through the October grass and reminded everyone that the afternoon was getting short and nothing had been settled. Pruitt covered the pause with a smile and leaned slow into the microphone. Well, now, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a volunteer. The word did its work. It told the crowd exactly how to rank what they were seeing. A black man in a coat that had been good once, no ticket, no name anyone recognized, standing at the gate of a $2.3 million event, as though the distance between where he was and where the riders had been was a formality rather than a wall. Some people laughed, more did not. The laughter that existed was the uncomfortable kind. People laughing because Pruitt had given them permission to relieve a discomfort they hadn't fully named yet. What's your name, friend? Odom. Pruitt let it sit, turned it over. Mr. Odom. The pause before it was its own sentence. The way he weighted the name told the crowd precisely how little he believed it meant. You got any experience with horses, Mr. Odom? Because this animal has put 3 men in the hospital this year alone, and I'd hate to be responsible for. I'll sign the waiver. The 4 words closed every door Pruitt had tried to open. Not aggressively. Cutter's voice had not risen, had not hardened, but finally, the way a door closes when the person on the other side has simply stopped needing what's inside. Something moved across Pruitt's face, a tightening at the jaw, a flicker behind the eyes that came and went before most of the front section caught it. He gestured to Fowler without looking at him, and Fowler moved to the gate with the clipboard. Cutter took the waiver, he read it. Every line, every clause, the liability language at the bottom that the 3 previous riders had skimmed in under 30 seconds. He read it the way a man reads a document when he has lost things before because he did not read carefully enough and has decided that it will not happen again. Then he signed it, handwriting clean and deliberate, each letter formed with the particular precision of someone who learned early that his signature needed to be unambiguous. Fowler looked at it once, then looked at it again. Something moved behind his eyes. He walked it back to the podium without speaking. Pruitt looked down at the name on the page. His jaw moved, barely, a small involuntary working of the muscle. Like a man trying to place a face he knows from somewhere he cannot immediately name. The recognition was there, and then it was gone, covered before it reached his expression, buried under the practiced ease of a man who has spent 61 years deciding what other people are allowed to see on his face. He turned back to the microphone. In the fourth row, a woman named Adele Fitch had not moved since Petra Duval walked off the ring floor. She was a retired equine veterinarian out of Lexington, 63 years old, and she had been sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching this event with the quiet attention of someone who is cataloging, not spectating. She had watched all 3 rides. She had watched the horse, not the riders, and something she had been turning over since the second fall, a nagging, professional unease she could not yet name, had been growing sharper with every minute she sat in that bleacher. When Pruitt said, "Let the man ride," in the tone of a man granting a privilege he was certain would end badly, Adele said, not loudly, but clearly enough to carry 2 rows in either direction, "Then stop talking and let him." The person beside her nodded. 2 rows behind, a man in a green work shirt looked up at the podium with something new and irreversible in his eyes. Cutter walked into the ring. No ceremony. No acknowledgement of the bleachers or the cameras or the microphone that was still live on Pruitt's podium. He walked to the center of the ring, stopped 40 feet from Ironclad, and stood still. The horse, who had charged the paddock gate 3 days ago when a groom came within 30 feet, did not charge. His ears moved, his nostrils worked the air, his head tilted a single, careful degree toward the figure standing motionless in the center of the ring. The way a compass needle tilts toward something, it has been waiting, for nobody in the bleachers understood yet what they were watching. But something had already begun. He did not walk toward the horse. That was the first thing the crowd noticed. That Cutter Odom standing 40 feet from an animal that had put 6 men in hospitals across 3. Years made no move toward it. He breathed. His hands were loose at his sides, his weight shifted slightly back on his heels, his shoulders carrying none of the forward lean that every previous rider had brought into this ring. The posture said something that the crowd could feel without being able to name. It was not stillness for its own sake. It was the stillness of a man who already knows what he is dealing with and is not in any hurry to prove it to anyone else. A man in the upper section called out something impatient, the particular impatience of someone who has paid for a spectacle and wants it to begin on his schedule. Adele Fitch, without raising her voice, told him to be quiet. He was. Cutter was not performing stillness. He was reading. He watched Ironclad's weight distribution. The way the horse's left hip sat fractionally higher than the right, a compensation pattern, the body solving for something the body has been solving for a long time. He watched the micro-flinch along the horse's top line when Ironclad shifted his stance, a movement that lasted less than a second, and that every professional rider who had stood in this ring had either missed or misread as aggression. He watched the horse's breathing, controlled, not panicked, the rhythm of an animal managing pain rather than processing fear. Cutter had seen this before. He had seen it in 7 horses across 30 years, and he knew exactly what he was looking at. 6 steps forward. Stop. The crowd leaned forward without knowing it. 6 more steps. Stop. Ironclad's left ear tracked him the way a compass tracks north. Not pinned flat, not aggressive, just precise. Monitoring. A woman in the 3rd row reached for her husband's arm and gripped it without looking at him, her eyes fixed on the center of the ring, her body telling her something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Cutter stood 20 feet from the horse, close enough now that the sound of Ironclad's breathing was audible to the first 4 rows, close enough that the leather creak of the saddle on the horse by Pruitt's stable hands 20 minutes before the event tightened to standard girth tension, the same girth that had been standard across 3 years and 6 riders, was something Cutter could hear clearly. Something shifted in his posture, a small, almost invisible settling of the shoulders. The particular stillness of a man who has just confirmed a suspicion he has been carrying for a long time, and who now has to decide how to say it in a room that does not want to hear it. He turned toward the podium, loosened the girth first. 4 words. Quiet. Not performed for the crowd, not announced into the air. Directed at the podium. Specific, the way a doctor states a diagnosis in a room that has been running the wrong treatment for years. The ring went silent in a way it had not been silent before. A different quality of quiet. Not the held breath of anticipation, but the stillness of 800 people who have just heard something they don't yet understand and already know they should. Pruitt's response came carefully. The girth is fine. The carefulness of a man losing an argument he has not yet admitted he is having. Cutter did not raise his voice. It's sitting 2 inches behind the pressure point. He let that land 1 full beat. Nobody moving, nobody breathing, then kept going. That's why he waits. He lets the ridge settle, and then he tries to move the pain. He's not a dangerous horse, Mr. Pruitt. He's a horse that's been hurting for 3 years and nobody thought to check. Stay with this story. Subscribe, and don't go anywhere. The silence that followed lasted 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, 800 people recalculated simultaneously. 3 riders broken that afternoon, 6 men across 3 years, hospital visits, the legend of an unrideable horse, the $2.3 million prize that had grown each year like a number attached to something unsolvable. Every piece of it shifted at once. The horse was not unrideable. The horse was not wild. The horse had been in pain since the beginning, and Dellard Pruitt had been staging a public spectacle around that pain for 3 years, and calling it a competition. The state legislator put his phone in his pocket. One of the bloodstock agents in the front section turned slowly and looked up at the podium with an expression that Pruitt's PR man, standing 2 feet away, did not miss. Adele Fitch went very still, the particular stillness of a professional who has just heard something said out loud that she has been turning over in her own mind without being able to place it, and who now understands exactly what it means for every man who sat in this ring across 3 years of events. The unease she'd been carrying since the second fall had just been given its name. Fowler was already moving toward the paddock gate before Pruitt said a word. A groom stepped in. The girth was adjusted. 30 seconds of work. The loosening of a leather strap by 2 inches. A correction so simple it should not have been possible for it to carry this much weight. Ironclad shuddered, a long, deep shudder that moved through his entire top line. Not resistance, not aggression, the unmistakable release of an animal that has just been told, for the first time in 3 years, that it is allowed to stop bracing. He dropped his head 4 inches. The collective inhale of 100 people happened at almost the same moment. A sound like wind finding a gap in a wall that has been sealed for a very long time. The girth was adjusted. The horse had exhaled for the first time in 3 years, and Cutter Odom, who had still not told a single person in that ring who he was or where he came from, walked the last 20 feet to Ironclad and reached out his hand. He did not rush the last 20 feet. Cutter let Ironclad smell his hand first. The back of it, knuckles down, held still at the horse's nose level without pushing forward, not reaching, just offering. Ironclad's nostrils worked it slowly, the way a horse reads something it wants to be certain about before it decides. His ears went flat, then forward, then flat again, the sequence of an animal that has heard something it recognizes in a language it had stopped, expecting anyone to speak. Then Cutter moved his hand to his own shoulder and let the horse smell that, then the side of his neck. He spoke something close to Ironclad's ear, low enough that no microphone caught it, close enough that the horse's ear swiveled toward his mouth the way a receiver turns toward a signal it has been searching for. Adele Fitch, standing at the rail 40 feet away, watched his lips move, She would later say she could not be certain what he said. But Ironclad's breathing slowed by a full count, and the horse did not step back. Cutter lifted his left foot into the stirrup, the way a man steps into a boat on still water. No vault, no swing, no hop. Slow, deliberate. He sat down into the saddle as though he had been sitting there for years and had only stepped away for a moment and was simply returning to a place that belonged to him. Ironclad took one small step sideways, testing the weight, a question, not a threat, and then settled. The crowd did not cheer. The crowd had forgotten the mechanism of cheering. He asked the horse to walk with a shift of weight, nothing else. No heel, no voice, no visible command. Ironclad walked. The sound of hoofbeats on packed earth moved through the silence of the bleachers all the way to the back row, a clean 4-beat walk, unhurried, the horse's back swinging freely beneath the saddle, his neck long and low, a movement so different from the coiled explosive thing that had been in this ring an hour ago, that the change registered in the bleachers as something close to impossible. People stopped trying to understand it and simply watched. The man in the upper section who had taken his hat off was still holding it against his chest. He had not put it back on. He did not know he was still holding it. Cutter asked for a trot with the same economy, a breath, a weight shift, nothing more. Ironclad moved into it without resistance, a long ground-covering trot, each stride reaching forward with the particular freedom of a body that has just been relieved of something it had been carrying too long. Two people in the bleachers independently wondered for one irrational second whether the horse had been switched. He had not been switched. He was simply, for the first time in 3 years, not hurting. The difference looked like a different animal because it was a different life. Cutter brought him to a canter on the left lead. Ironclad arched his neck and blew out through his nose, a long, low exhale that the microphones caught and sent through every speaker on the east lawn. The sound moved through the bleachers, like a word everyone understood, but nobody had a translation for. He held the canter through the long side of the ring, balanced and forward, the horse's ears soft, his jaw unclenched for the first time in memory. Then Cutter asked for the first lead change, a quiet signal, weight and leg, the kind of ask that only works when the horse trusts the person doing the asking. Ironclad gave it to him, clean. No fumble, no resistance. Just a clean swap of leads mid-stride the way the animal was built to do before someone put him in pain and called him dangerous. A murmur moved through the bleachers. Not a cheer, a murmur, the way a congregation murmurs when something is said that sounds like a truth they had, forgotten, they already knew. The woman in the third row had not released her husband's arm. The second lead change came on the short end of the ring. Other direction, same quiet ask, clean again. Cutter turned him then, brought him off the rail, angled him toward the center line, pointed him directly at the podium where Dellard Pruitt stood, with the microphone hanging at his side and nothing left to say into it. He asked for a sliding stop through nothing but a shift of weight and a single feather light close of the hand. Ironclad gave it, planted at the dead center of the ring, 20 feet from the base of the podium, hooves hissing into the packed earth, dust rising in a low curtain around his legs. He stood perfectly still in the settling dust with his ears forward and his breathing easy, and his head level, facing the man who had called him unrideable for 3 years, 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Not one buck, not a flinch. Cutter sat in the saddle for a moment after the stop. One breath, maybe two, and then dismounted at the center line. He did not walk the horse to the rail. He let the reins fall loose across Ironclad's neck and stood beside him, with one hand resting on the horse's shoulder. For the first time in the entire afternoon, his face was fully visible to the crowd, not angled down toward the horse, not turned toward the gate. He was 54 years old. His jaw was set. His mouth was neither soft nor hard, and he was looking directly at Dellard Pruitt with the patient, level attention of a man who has waited a very long time to be seen clearly and has decided that today is the day and that he is willing to stand here for as long as it takes. The arena held what it was holding. 4 seconds of silence. Then 5. A child in the back section whispered to her mother, "Is it over?" Her mother did not answer. And then Adele Fitch, the retired veterinarian who had been sitting with her hands folded in her lap since before the first rider mounted, who had been turning something over in her professional mind for 2 hours and had just watched it resolved in 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Put her hands together and clapped. Once, just once. The sound of that single clap moved up the bleachers like a struck bell, and the thing that had been held in 800 chests for the last 4 minutes and 40 seconds finally found its way out. The applause started at the rail and climbed the bleachers the way fire climbs dry grass. Not all at once, but inevitably, each row catching from the one below it, until the sound had become something physical, a pressure on the chest of every person in the ring. The network cameras locked on the man, and the horse standing motionless at the center line. The director in the broadcast truck said quietly to his co-producer, "Don't cut. Don't cut." Pruitt stood on the podium with the microphone at his side. He did not raise it. He did not smile. He did not wave at the cameras the way he had waved at them every other time the crowd had made noise today. His PR man, Fowler, stood 3 feet to his left with both hands in his pockets, studying his shoes with the focused attention of a man who has decided the safest thing he can do right now is be invisible. The state legislator in the blue tie had turned in his seat and was watching Pruitt with the particular stillness of a man deciding, in real time, whether to be publicly associated with what he is looking at. When the applause finally began to crest, Cutter spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform for the cameras that were locked on his face. He spoke toward the podium, the same direction he had been speaking all afternoon. "You said this horse was unrideable." He let it sit there for a full beat, long enough for every person in that ring to replay the last 3 years of this event in their minds. He wasn't unrideable. He was hurting. There's a difference between something that won't and something that can't. You stopped looking for the difference a long time ago. The arena went quiet in a way that was different from every previous quiet of the afternoon. Not held breath, not anticipation, the weighted stillness of something that has just been said that cannot be unsaid, and that everyone present knows they will be remembering for a long time. Cutter turned slightly toward the crowd, not performing, not gesturing, just including them, the way a man includes a room when what he is saying belongs to all of it. My grandfather worked horses in Harlan County, Kentucky, his father before him. Men who looked like me built the reputation of this industry from the ground up. A pause that the microphones caught and held. You won't find their names in your program tonight. If this story is hitting something real in you, subscribe, because the truth of who this man actually is hasn't come out yet. Pruitt uncapped his pen. He wrote the check on the hood of the podium's built-in lectern, pressing hard because his hand kept wanting to stop. The perforation tear when he pulled it free was audible in the first 12 rows, a clean, sharp sound, the particular sound of something that has been under pressure for a very long time finally giving way all at once. He held the check out over the edge of the podium, without speaking, without looking directly at the man below. Cutter did not reach for it immediately. He looked up at Pruitt for one more moment, the unhurried patience of a man who wants to be certain he is, being remembered accurately that this moment is being stored correctly in the people who are watching it. Then he stepped forward and took the check. He did not look at it. He folded it once, cleanly, and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat, against his chest, over the same place his right hand had rested that morning at the rail, before the bleachers filled, before the cameras went live, before any of this had a name. He turned back to the horse. Ironclad had not moved. He stood in the center of the ring with his ears forward and his head low, breathing easy for the first time in 3 years. Cutter placed both hands on the horse's face, one on each side of the jaw, thumbs resting below the cheekbones, and pressed his forehead gently against the animal's forehead. They stood there together in the settling dust, man and the horse, and nobody in the bleachers said anything because there was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying better. Petra Duval had not left the grounds. She had watched every second from the paddock gate, standing alone at the rail with her arms folded and her helmet hanging from her left hand. When Cutter walked ironclad off the ring floor, she stepped forward and opened the gate herself. She held it while he passed through. One line, quiet, not for anyone else. I felt it. I felt the girth. I didn't know what it meant. Cutter stopped. He looked at her, at the dried mud on her boot from the fall, at the careful way she was still holding her left shoulder. "Now you do," he said. Then he walked ironclad into the barn and began the slow, patient work of untacking a horse that had finally been told the truth. Behind him, at the rail, a reporter called out, "Mr. Odom, who are you?" He did not stop, did not turn. The question hung in the air over the empty ring, unanswered, while the applause was still fading from the bleachers, and Pruitt was still standing on his podium with nothing left in his hands. One person at that event already knew the answer. She had been watching him since before the gates opened, and she had already started writing. While the reporter scrum gathered at the barn entrance, microphones out, cameras on shoulders, everyone talking at once, a woman named Nora Sill found a hay bale 20 feet down the aisle and sat on it. She was a freelance writer out of Louisville, 41 years old, and she had been at this event since 7 that morning on a press credential she had negotiated for 3 weeks. She did not join the scrum. She did not raise her hand. She set her phone on the hay bale beside her, opened the recording app, and waited. When Cutter walked past with ironclad saddle over his arm, she said quietly, "Would you sit down? I have one question." Long enough to decide something. Then he set the saddle on the bale across from her and sat. She did not lean forward, did not pick up the phone. "Who were you?" she said. "Before you came to Lexington." Cutter was quiet long enough that the barn sounds filled the space. A horse shifting in a stall, the distant fade of the crowd outside. Ironclad, slow breathing, 2 stalls down. Then he said, "My mother called me Curtis. My father called me Cutter. I've been Cutter since I was 8 years old, so." Nora waited. 19 years ago, I was the head conditioning trainer at Northbrook Stables in Fayette County. He said it the way a man says something he has not said out loud in a long time, not with bitterness, not with performance, just the plain statement of a fact that still belongs to him regardless of what came after. First black head trainer that barn had employed in 90 years of operation. I prepared 4 Kentucky Derby entrants. 2 of them finished in the top 3. A pause. I knew Ironclad's sire, trained him as a 3-year-old. Knew that bloodline the way you know a handwriting you've read for years. Nora did not speak. She understood that the worst thing she could do right now was interrupt. 8 years ago, Northbrook dissolved its training division. Ownership changed. New people came in, looked at what was there, and restructured. He stopped on that word. Let it sit between them for a moment, the way he'd been letting it sit for 8 years, which meant they thanked me with a handshake and rebuilt the position under a different name with a different person in it. I didn't fight it. Fighting required resources and connections and the goodwill of people with leverage. I had learned by then that those things were not distributed the same way to everyone who earned them. He left the bluegrass. The barn aisle was quiet enough that Nora could hear him breathing through what came next. Loading docks in Louisville, kitchen work in Bowling Green, a ranch job in western Kentucky that ended when the operation changed hands, then another. By the time he arrived in Lexington 18 months ago, the rooming house off Winchester Road was what was available, and he had stopped measuring available against what he had once had because that arithmetic only goes one direction, and he had decided he was done doing it. 8 months ago, he said, I found a horse sale catalog in the break room of a loading dock in Louisville. Someone had left it on the table. I was eating lunch. He stopped for a moment, and something shifted in his face. Not grief exactly, but the look of a man locating the precise point where things change direction. There was a photograph, dark bay thoroughbred, 16 hands, Breeders' Cup bloodline through the sire. The description said, "Behavioral issues, does not accept riders, cause unknown." He looked at Nora for the first time since he had started talking. That phrase, cause unknown. I have read that phrase on 7 horses in the last 20 years. 6 of them had pain that nobody had bothered to diagnose. 6 of them. He had torn the page from the catalog, folded it once, put it in the inside pocket of his coat against his chest, and kept it there for 8 months, through the loading dock shifts, through the Winchester Road rooming house, through 3 weeks of driving past Crestfall Farm in the early morning dark, to watch Ironclad move in the paddock before the stable hands arrived. I watched him for 40 minutes through the fence, 3 weeks before the event, he said. 5 in the morning, watched the way he carried his left hip, the way his top line flinched when he shifted weight. That was all I needed. I already knew what the girth was doing. I just needed to see where it was sitting to be certain. Nora said, "So you walked 11 miles this morning for a horse?" "I walked 11 miles, Cutter said, because for the first time in 8 years there was a number large enough attached to the problem that someone might let me near it. The silence after that was the kind that a room earns rather than falls into." Nora asked one more question. Was it worth it? The 11 miles? Cutter looked down the barn aisle to where Ironclad stood in his stall, head low, weight even on all 4 feet. The long muscles of his back finally unclenched, a horse resting fully for the first time in 3 years. "Ask him," Cutter said, "what nobody in that barn knew yet." What Nora's piece would make plain 6 weeks later was the detail that had been sitting in plain sight since morning. The thing Cutter had pressed against his chest at the rail before the bleachers filled, before the cameras went live, the right hand moving to the inside pocket of the coat. It was the catalog page. Ironclad's photograph, torn carefully along the edge, folded once, kept against his chest for 8 months like a thing worth protecting. And when he had slid the $2, $3 million check into that same pocket at the center of the ring, without looking at it, without pausing, he had placed it over the photograph, the money going where the reason for it had lived all along. He had not come to Lexington for the money. He had come because he recognized a horse in pain, the same way he had recognized horses in pain for 30 years, and because the horse was the son of an animal he had once known as a colt, and because the phrase "cause unknown" had followed him out of a break room in Louisville and refused to let go until he did something about it. Nora Silva's piece would run 6 weeks later. It would do something that prize money alone never could. It would give Cutter Odom back his name. But Cutter was not waiting for the piece. He was already working. 7 months after the Crestfall Challenge, on 14 acres of leased pasture outside Versailles, Kentucky, a hand-painted sign hung above a cedar gate. Odom Conditioning, Rehabilitation and Rider Development. Below it, smaller, burned directly into the wood. If the horse won't go, ask why first. Everyone who pulled up to that gate for the first time read both lines. Nobody who read them forgot them. Most of the $2, $3 million, had gone into a trust structured around 2 purposes. The first was the rehabilitation of performance horses whose behavioral problems had been misdiagnosed as temperament rather than pain. Horses the industry had written off, horses the auction houses had stopped calling sound, horses that had been cycled through trainers and handlers and facilities until someone with a pen and a clipboard had finally written dangerous and moved on. Cutter had a list. He had been building it for years in his head, names and locations and catalog descriptions, horses he had read about or seen photographs of, and recognized the way he had recognized Ironclad. The trust gave the list an address. The second purpose was a no-cost training program for black and brown riders from Fayette, Jefferson, and Hardin counties, young people who had grown up within driving distance of the greatest horse country in the world and had never once been invited inside it, not because they lacked ability, because the invitation had never been extended, and the absence of an invitation over enough years becomes indistinguishable from a closed door. Cutter knew what that felt like. He had been standing at those doors his entire career. Now he had one of his own, and he had decided to leave it open. Petra Duval arrived on the third week of the program's operation. She drove herself from Versailles in a truck that had seen better decades, pulled up to the Cedar Gate before anyone else arrived, and sat in the cab for a moment looking at the sign. Then she got out. She worked with the apprentices twice a week after that. Footwork, seat, the mechanics of reading a horse's weight shift before it becomes a signal. She did not charge. She did not announce she was coming on any given morning. She simply arrived, and the apprentices learned to recognize the sound of her truck on the gravel as something reliable. Her exit from Pruitt's ring floor, the walk to the gate without looking back, the expression nobody in the bleachers had been able to name, had not been defeat, it had been calculation. She had felt the girth. She hadn't known what it meant in the moment. Now she did, and she had decided that knowing obligated her. Ironclad lived in the far pasture. Cutter had purchased him from Dellard Pruitt at fair market value, a number Pruitt's lawyers had set, and Pruitt had accepted without negotiation, because the alternative was explaining publicly why he would not sell a horse to the man who had just ridden him in front of 800 people and 3 cameras. The transaction was quiet. It was final. On the barn office wall, in a frame Cutter had found at an estate sale in Lexington, hung a $1 bill. Below it, hand-lettered on a strip of cardstock, receipt. It was the dollar that had paid for his first stall rental at Northbrook Stables when he was 22 years old, handed to him by an old trainer whose name the industry had long since stopped saying. He had kept it for 30 years without fully knowing why. Now he knew. Nora Silv's piece ran in Louisville Magazine 6 weeks after the Crestfall Challenge. It was read by the people who needed to read it. Working riders, horse welfare advocates, journalists who covered the industry seriously, and one woman who was the current director of a thoroughbred welfare organization in Lexington, who called Cutter 3 days after publication and asked, without preamble, how she could help. That phone call produced a partnership that would bring 4 more horses to the Versailles pasture within the year, no trending required. Just 2 people, a phone, and the accumulated weight of work done over a long time. The Crestfall Challenge was not announced for the following year. A brief item in the Lexington Herald Leader noted the cancellation in 4 sentences. Dellard Pruitt's name appeared once. The article moved on to other things. That, in the end, was its own kind of verdict, not the dramatic, satisfying ruin that stories promise, but the quiet, irreversible withdrawal of public attention, which is the only ending that is actually final. On a Tuesday morning in the 6th month of the program's operation, Cutter walked out to the far round pen and found a 19-year-old from Louisville standing 30 feet from a spooked gray mare. His hands were shaking, not from nerves, from something that takes longer to name. His name was Des Garland, 19 years old, out of Louisville, and he had taken a bus 40 miles that morning to stand in this round pen on a Tuesday because his older sister had read him Nora Silv's piece over the phone 3 weeks earlier, and he had not been able to stop thinking about it since. He had loved horses since he was 7 years old, loved them the way children love things before anyone has had the chance to tell them. The love is impractical, before the world has had time to explain all the reasons the door is not for them. By the time he was 12, the world had explained it thoroughly. He had spent the 7 years since carrying the love quietly, the way you carry something you have been told has no destination. He was not looking at the mare. He was looking at the ground in front of his boots, his hands loose at his sides, his shoulders carrying the particular weight of someone who has driven 40 miles towards something he has wanted for years and is now standing in front of it and does not know if he is allowed to want it out loud. The gray mare stood 30 feet away at the far curve of the round pen. She was 4 years old, off track. Her behavioral file a single page of escalating notes that ended with the word unmanageable and the name of the facility that had given up on her. She was not unmanageable. She was waiting to find out if this person was another thing she had to be afraid of. She had been asking that question about every person who entered her space for 4 years. Most of them had answered it wrong. Cutter stood a half step behind Dez. He watched the boy's shoulders. He watched the mare's ears. He said nothing for a long moment. Long enough that the morning sounds filled the space. The October light coming through the fence slats in long bars across the pale dust of the round pen floor. Then quietly, so only Dez could hear it. Don't try to fix her. Just let her know you're not another thing she has to be afraid of. If this story reached something in you, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one, and you deserve to hear every one of them. Dez's shoulders dropped a 1/4 inch. Not a dramatic release, a small, involuntary letting go, the kind the body does when it has been given permission to stop. Break. The mare's ears, which had been tracking every sound from the fence line, came forward. She lowered her head 2 inches and held it there, testing the quality of the stillness coming from the figure 30 feet away. The morning was cool. The light moved across the dust in slow bars. Nothing dramatic happened. A frightened animal decided, slowly and on its own terms, that this particular person was safe. It was not a miracle. It was the oldest thing in the world, one creature telling another, "I am not here to take anything from you." Cutter watched and did not speak again. In the far pasture, Ironclad grazed in the early light, unsaddled, unhurried, the old scars along his withers, catching the morning sun, and holding it briefly the way old things hold light differently than new ones. He had not been entered in any competition. He had not been sold or consigned or catalogued. He was simply there, in 14 acres of Kentucky pasture on a Tuesday morning eating grass. After 3 years of being defined entirely by what he could not do, he was being allowed to be a horse. It turned out that was enough. It had always been enough. Nobody had bothered to ask. What Cutter had said to Ironclad in that ring, the words that no microphone had caught, that Adele Fitch had watched his lips form without being able to read, were the same words he had just said to Des Garland, the same words he had been saying, in one form or another, to broken things for 30 years. He had said them to horses in pain. He had said them, without speaking, to himself on loading docks in Louisville and in rooming houses off Winchester Road, on mornings when the distance between where he was and where he had been felt like a measurement that only went one direction. Don't try to fix it. Just let it know you're not another thing it has to be afraid of. The work was not finished. It was never finished. There were horses on the list that had not arrived yet, and young riders in Fayette and Jefferson and Hardin counties who did not know this gate existed, and mornings ahead that would be hard in the particular way that building something from almost nothing is always hard. But on this Tuesday, in this round pen, a 19-year-old from Louisville and a gray mare who had been called unmanageable were finding out, together, that the word had been wrong, that it had always been wrong, and that someone had finally thought to check. Cutter watched Des and the mare from the fence. He did not speak. He did not need to. The work had already begun, and some things only move in silence. Before we end, I want to tell you something. When I first read about Cutter Odom, I had to stop. I sat with it for a long time, because I kept thinking about one thing. For 8 years, that man stood on loading docks and walked through kitchen doors, while the industry he had spent his life building kept running without him, and he was never the one who was broken. The broken one was the man on the podium, the man with the East Lawn and the bleachers and the $2. $3 million he was certain he would never have to pay. Cutter wasn't waiting to be rescued. He was watching for the right problem. He walked 11 miles that morning because he already knew the answer. He just needed someone to finally let him near the question. So here is what I want to ask you. Who in your life is carrying something nobody has bothered to look at? Who have you walked past because they didn't look the way expertise is supposed to look? Somebody around you right now has been standing at a gate that nobody thought to open. You might be the person with the key. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room isn't the horse. It's the man who decided, without asking, that it couldn't be ridden. Good night.